The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kilauea and Mauna Loa volcano update today, Thursday, September 16th, 2021. It's been quiet on both volcanoes, but we're going to give you a rundown of the monitoring signals courtesy of the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And then we'll do our usual discussion of live viewer questions at the end. So drop your questions to Dane in the chat, and he'll answer whatever he can right there, and select some others for us to discuss here at the end. And also be monitoring our stream. Let us know if there's any issues with our audio or video in the chat as well. Dane. And I'll be narrating today. We're gonna start off with Kilauea as usual. It's been pretty quiet on Kilauea. Last week we talked about how despite the quiet, there was still some adjustments happening from the intrusion. In short, it seems like that phase seems to be over. We're now back to that full pre-intrusion status. The big difference being we don't have nearly as many earthquakes as we did in that time for the intrusion. That really, earthquakes were elevated for several months ahead of time leading up to that, and so it may take a while for that to happen again. And we'll have to wait and see what the next chapter brings. You know, where the earthquakes actually focus once they emerge. Interesting thing there. We could go all over history, and in the end, it comes up. Could be really anywhere. So many areas, any kind of. So we won't try to do any guessing at that. Okay, just show you guys this view of the KW camera webcam here. View of the summit. That's that crested over lava lake. There's still lava inside that crust that would be there for decades, and all that other activity was happening further over here, up above the rim, over in this flat, off the screen over here to the right. South caldera area near what's called the outlet, that little spot on the south caldera wall where the lava could eventually outlet. That's the most current view. There's also that new web camera. That's the KO camera. South. Past that 82 flow. Towards 82 flow, right? This was a flow that came from an eruption in the same area as the seismicity was this past. Darker colors right through there. All covered in this tephra from the explosive phases. Eruptions back 1790 and earlier, that era of time. More explosive. So a little context for us before we get going in here. Here's our most recent earthquakes on a typical USGS map. It's commonly viewed. You can see our Pahala cluster is still ongoing, it's still flaring off, and maybe we'll circle back to this at some point in the next few weeks, since it's been a little while and it's still ongoing. We can maybe do some stats and that. For now, it's almost part of the background. It's been going on for so long at that intense rate that it's hard to really pay any more mind at this point in time. Quite relevant to what's happening as far as our activity on the surface here, both on Kilauea and Mauna Loa. So Kilauea is over here, and only a few earthquakes at the summit, and a few on the south flank showing up on this particular map. A lot more in Mauna Loa. This is all for the past week, of course. So really, it's kind of slow. The orange ones are past couple of days. There's only a couple of those, and then the rest are yellow within the next week. So not very much activity there either. But looks like a little more than Kilauea, where there's hardly any at all. Mauna Loa, it seems to be in its typical spots to the northwest, and also that southeast flank that we imagine is moving to accommodate magma coming into the volcano. But interesting to think about and to consider in the future, what that eruption in the southwest, intrusion in the southwest right over here, right? This is an area that's directly downhill from Mauna Loa. How that could possibly affect this dynamic, right? And in the past, it's been suggested that eruptions have been avoided or have not happened because Mauna Loa has inflated and the squeeze is closed and prevented from lava from coming up in these areas of the southwest rift over there. So interesting that, without an actual eruption, but putting more material into that area maybe changes that a little bit. And we're interested to see exactly how it changes it and what happens. Right now, there's no signs of anything happening except some minor short-term adjustments, and we'll look at the end of our rundown. So let's look in a little more detail. Here are the earthquake rates for the past year on Kilauea, and see this spike here of over 1,200 earthquakes per week is our measure on this particular graph. Was an intrusionary pulse right there. And you see how that rose above this elevated background that we've seen ever since the end of the 2020-2021 eruption right there. And similar to the background we saw previous to the eruption as well, right through there, with it had a couple of spikes as well. Mauna Loa adjustment here, intrusionary spike right there, and then a build up to the eruption right. Interestingly, compared to 2020 sequence where we had an intrusion right away, we maintained elevated earthquake rates for several weeks afterwards. We have not seen that here this week. If I zoom in a little more, each one of these bars is 1 week, so that was that 1 week that was between 3 weeks ago and 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, and so here we are. You can see that we're still within that elevated range, more or less. We're not down to here yet, right? And this one likely it's only half of a week, so it'll likely come back up some way towards here, this range as well. The point being, they're not all the way up here or anything like that. So we'll have to wait and see what happens as far as any further activity at the summit. But you'd imagine you'd want to see these rates would higher up before you believe something. Right? And of course, remembering that this is still elevated all through here, but it doesn't seem to be really flaring off like it was prior to this one intrusion.
Yeah, it looks like we're having a little bit of issue with your microphone. It keeps cutting out after periods of it working, then it just hard cuts out and then cuts back in after a few seconds.
Let's check, see if there's any loose connections here. Well,
yeah, I was trying to think if that's software or hardware.
I'll check the settings here just to make sure. and that's why
Right.
looks like it's correct. I'll keep an eye on my monitor here too. Looking okay for now.
All right.
All right.
We'll keep going.
Maybe those little tweaks I just did might have maybe. Okay. All right. So yeah, what I was saying here is that the earthquake rates of that intrusionary pulse several weeks ago have not been maintained to that high level, even if we're still more or less within this elevated background above what we saw during eruption, but similar to what we saw before the eruption. Over here where we had this higher range right through here with a couple elevated spikes. So this is our elevated background level right through here. And we seem to be still around that or so, but we just don't see that concentration really on the summit and rift zone areas. So there's one other caveat here, which I'll talk about shortly, which is that this is measuring earthquakes in a particular box. So let's show you the box here that we have. Well, the box. Here's what the past month looked like. So the reason this is important is the box includes, all the way to Kapoho, which is fine, nothing happening there, but it also goes and includes part of this Pahala zone over here. So when we have elevated numbers, we have to make sure that we're not seeing them all from Pahala. We're really seeing what's happening our volcano, right? So because when we focus in to the last month here, earthquakes per day now, and here is a last week, last 2 weeks, and here is the 3 to 2 weeks ago pulse with that one phase, second phase, and third phase that we discussed already. Really, it's been quiet, nothing changed. We're down around 50 earthquakes per day. That's this whole area, that square, and more closely over the past week or so here. And on the map, that looks like this. And so you can see something. You can see there is some clustering here in Pahala. That's okay, but just want to make sure we account for that in our numbers. We do see some south flank action, small numbers and small magnitudes, but a little bit of adjustment happening in that zone right through there still. That seems to be ongoing and normal, and that hasn't changed regardless of any activity in the zone, it seems like. And at the summit, you can see that we have some sparse activity around the pit and perimeter a little bit. Not really anything in that intrusion area, not really anything in that southwest rift. Maybe somewhat in that Kauai region, but within that background, it's almost like a shotgun pattern here. Concentration. It's almost like there's just background, really. I wonder if we were to take out all these earthquakes that are happening over here, this line over here, of Mauna Loa and Pahala stuff, our numbers would be quite a bit less here as well. We actually might see a seismic lull upper part of Kilauea, more so than this graph seen over here. So that's the earthquake pattern, and compared to the last month, it really is a stark contrast, right? How many earthquakes we had in the last month here. Is the audio any better? The mic still cutting out?
No, I think that fixed it.
Fix it? All right, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what else we have for the month here, and I think I lost my spot. Okay, we'll go back to the last week of month. So here's that map. There are a couple other ways to look at it. Here it is in cross section, right? So we can see that if we were to look across this slice of the ground and look at the depth, just put everything in this bucket straight down. Most of those earthquakes, Pahala, you see this not just the ones down underneath, but the ones above it. That's been going on for a while as well. A lot of adjustment above it, smaller earthquakes above and larger ones below. A lot of these small ones don't always show up on that USGS automatic web page, right? But they do show up in these particular graphs, interestingly enough. So if we exclude all of that stuff, really, it's just all over here is what we're looking at. And in comparison, it's pretty sparse compared to what we've seen before. The way to look at it is across time, so looking at time rather than longitude now. You see that there's that steady activity down low. That's easy to exclude. Up here, everything is mixed together, so it's hard to tell, but you still see there's not a whole lot of pattern or intensity anywhere in there as well. Deformation-wise, over the past week, we've had a net inflation from minus 1.2, we'll call it, to positive 1.3, we'll call it, so 2.5-ish microradians. Not a huge amount. It's got a little wiggle in the middle there, almost like a little deflation inflation cycle, perhaps. Might be slightly skewed there. And so here's my monthly map. So here we can see that monthly pattern where we have a lot more earthquakes over here to that eastern part of Kilauea. And looking at the rate and depth plot over here, you can see also what it looked like when we had that intrusionary pulse right through here, and when we don't. Lack of orange circles all piled on top of one another, essentially, is what you're seeing, right? That's what that intrusionary pulse was, that first pulse, and then second pulse right there. Comparison. Now, still see activity, but like I said, some of this is above Pahala, and it's not nearly as intense as it was before. It might be enough beating those earthquakes there, but while we're on the monthly chart here, let's scroll down and look at the gas. There was one more gas measurement taken on the, looks like the 14th or 15th, perhaps in the morning of the 14th here, and coming out close to 55 tons per day. The second one around that in that range, within that tight little range, within 50 to 60. Even though the one before that, at 115 or so, was still within that background range. You know, the one before that was closer to 45 or so. Still within that range, not a whole lot of change there. You know, maybe some little variations, but nothing significant that you can really see with this amount of data. And looking at the ambient air measurements here, the scale is the most important thing. Nothing's jumping off. You see similar patterns. You know, the wind can change, or it can be slightly more intense at area for one day or another. You're looking for something more like this, where it's jumping off to, in this case, it was 50 ppm. And if this would have been a true signal, then this would have been an alert that something was coming to the surface near there. But in this case, it was confirmed by the USGS that this was station maintenance. So nothing to be alarmed with there. Everything in the gas seems to be within a background and quiet there as well. So deformation-wise, we're going to also peek in on the tilt meter at Sand Hill, which is the one closest to that intrusion. And if you recall, that green line is the one that points to the southeast from Sand Hill direction. It's tangential component. And the blue one points to the northeast. So this one seems to be that shallower intrusion. I'm sorry, the deeper intrusion. And this one is a shallower one here, but it also points to Hale Ma'u. So you're going to see a combination of shallow intrusion that comes in, and then it seems like it perhaps drains out, while that deeper intrusion comes in. First pulse, second pause, second pulse right here, and it basically ends right through here. That's that week-long event right through there. So what happened since then is what we're going to look at now, but that's the context of it. You can see that on that deeper, that main intrusionary area to the southeast, that it stayed fairly steady. Some little deviations. This scale here is 20 microradians top to bottom, so this is really squished in there. It's hard to tell what these little pixels are fairly meaningful. But it goes down a little bit, comes up a little bit, it stays more or less, more or less within that range, within, we'll call it 5 microradians or so, until sometime around the 6th or 7th or so, when it starts to essentially deflate. And since that point in time, it's come down perhaps not quite 10 microradians, maybe 8 microradians or so, but a decent amount on this plot here on the southeast part. So it seems like, if anything, that area where the intrusion had recently been filling and swelling, that perhaps is doing the opposite, right? Why might it be doing that? That's interesting. I wonder if you could possibly lose the gas somewhere else and keep most of the magma there and have that kind of adjustment. I have no idea. Maybe the easiest thing would be to move the magma itself somewhere else, to move it through that complicated plumbing system over towards somewhere else in the summit region. And that's possible, right? If we turn now to look at this blue line, that shallow sill-like area of the intrusion seemed like it was over right here before the actual main pulse was over. So consider this to be the background point from this point on, without the sill taking any contribution. And you can see it was actually inflating fairly quickly in the first week or so. And then it continues inflating, but at a much slower pace. But really, it's been an inflationary trend on that northeast towards Hale Ma'u component. So that's what we'll have to look at next is, if it going anywhere, perhaps it's going over towards Maunaloa area and under the summit. Although it's hard to tell that with this little data. It's just the one possibility that fits the bill there, right? Looking at the GPS system across Kilauea summit, north to south, there's some wiggle in here, and the first thing we'll focus on is a very trend here at the end, right here, this last little bit, and it's basically the same as what we saw before, and that's what we mean by it's resuming its trend. It's basically doing the same thing as it was before. All this mess in here is the adjustment of the intrusion to the south and everything getting deformed essentially, right? But really you can see that we've resumed that pattern. So the GPS and the tilt now are consistent with this inflationary pattern from before, but without the earthquakes. That's our story here. And going down at Pu'o'o, our scale is a lot different here. We're still looking at offset in meters, right? But let me put it back up so you guys can see. Each hash mark here is 5 centimeters on this upper graph at Wekahuna, the crater rim. And down here, each hash mark is 0.5 centimeters. So it's a full order of magnitude difference between those two graphs. Still interesting to look at a little bit because this distance across the rift zone is something that it's a little muddied what it might actually mean, but we can look at it a little bit at what this might tell us. You can see fairly steady, and then a big decrease coming down here, and this decrease occurs, it seems like, coincident with that initiation of the summit eruption of Halemaumau in late December 2020. And it was erupting until May, essentially, right? So this whole shortening of the distance of the rift zone, was something that was talked about before as possible backflow from the East Rift Zone back towards the summit to feed that eruption, something that was mentioned by the USGS in several updates. And that would be consistent with this distance shortening right there, right? Even if it is by this one order of magnitude less, and it's just tiny, tiny changes, right? We're not talking about a fully inflated balloon that's like, if we just let go of the seal, it'll just start venting the air we blew into it kind of thing, right? More one that's still a balloon, but it's not fully pressurized where you can still express those changes, but it's not really puffed up where everything's amplified in that manner, right? So that's my personal interpretation and attempt to explain it in simple terms here. So what we essentially see here is a slowdown, and maybe I don't know, it's hard to say, maybe this trend if maybe continues like this. It's hard to tell, a lot of noise right through here, but essentially it's stable by the last couple months right through here. And you can see what's interesting is that since this event, it's now contracting again, not as fast as before, maybe more so like this range, but interesting that I wonder if we will hear at some point from the USGS that there's more evidence of backflow from this East Rift Zone towards the summit region. Hard to say, but the pattern here looks similar to what we saw before. That's the only interesting thing here to see. Pu'o'o won't dwell on it that much longer. There's adjustments happening everywhere across the volcano, and one thing that I will talk about at some point in the future is how, I just mentioned this now, there were studies done of the contraction of the rift zone in Pahoa during a Pu'o'o eruption, when there was no lava flowing anywhere near the rift zone in Pahoa. It was all uphill at Pu'o'o, and it's at Pu'o'o for decades, right? There was still a huge amount of adjustment at the rift zone at Pahoa throughout that whole time. That's something we can review and show you guys how there's like a background adjustment that's always happening all the time anyways. And so that's why I guess once it gets to be the smaller scale, it's hard to really judge what is what there. But in any case, we'll look at this Pu'o'o signal a little bit more when we look at the other GPS signals, which is what we'll turn to here next. I'm gonna pull it back up here and come to the top of our 2-year GPS index that we're using here. And once again, if you haven't seen this before, this is 3 components: east, north, and up. And so you can see that Wekahuna, and these are now 2-year plots, I should say, as well. And everything's in meters, and so we're going to look at the patterns more so than the magnitudes today. But 2 years, so really everything that we're looking at in the past graph would have been smashed into this right half right over here, right? So we're really going to have to focus and scrutinize the last little right side of this to really see anything. And really, we're going to look at trends. As far as Wekahuna, you can see that the trend hasn't really changed throughout the intrusion, so the trend is consistent with before the intrusion. As far as the north, you can see maybe it accelerated a little bit, but it's similar, consistent with before. You can see that on the east that it had adjusted. Maybe it's doing something funny right there, but really it's starting to be in the same direction as before, right? And maybe a little bit faster and then slowing down here at the end. It's hard to really zoom in on it more for you guys, but I'm about the limit of my software right here. Now over at Byron's Ledge, he's still getting pushed to the east quite a bit. Pattern north is the same, pattern up's the same. We'll scoot down to the crater rim, which is the other side of that distance measurement there. And you can see that as far as the east, stopped getting pushed to the east a week ago. So you can see that now that all those patterns of the crater rim that we were talked about, and especially this one right here, is the one that is probably worth focusing on the most. This is the one that last week we were saying, look, the pattern before was it actually is moving south, and the intrusion pushed it north. But if you look at the last week, it's actually still moving north, just a lot slower. Well, within this most recent week, it's now moving south again at a faster rate right there. So that's a key indicator right there. As far as up, you can see what's been going up for a long time. So it's just more about the rate, steeper, slower kind of thing. So believable there as well. And you can see that similar pattern over here where it was going up really fast and then slowed down how fast it was going up and then really stopped going up altogether just within the past week there. That's what I mean as far as the changes that were happening up until last week and have now resumed their pre-intrusion trend there. And looking over at the outlet, which is the one that's right above that intrusionary area. And you can see that it was moving up, and then you can see it adjusted more sooner. It adjusted sooner 2 weeks ago already, where it stopped moving to the east, and it was still coming back to the west at a faster pace there. Seen here. Resuming the trend there, and maybe here on the up is what we're not seeing, right? The crater rim, where we were going up during the intrusion, and now, if anything, we're the same or dropping a little bit. That's consistent with that tilt at the sand hill, where we saw perhaps 8 to 10 microreadings of deflation in that one area. And if we're seeing this signal right here, that's consistent as well. So that's why we might consider the possibility of that dike that was just intruded backflowing to other parts of the summit reservoir now, and perhaps feeding into Halemaumau a little bit, if what we're seeing now is all the signal is coming from Halemaumau, which is what appears to be the case. So that's the summit stations. As far as a rift, we can look at those a little bit as well. Maunaloa is on the south flank by south of the rift by Maunaloa there, so it's a little bit of a south flank signal. But interestingly, you can see that it's stopped moving south. So the rift zone perhaps is not pushing it as much there, perhaps. As far as getting pushed to the east, as all that pressure at the summit and upper east rift connector was building and quaking, a lot of these stations were pushed to the east, and you can see that really that pattern hasn't changed, and since May, really not a whole lot of change there on Maunaloa. Not a very telling station. I don't know, Yohamo. You can see the trends are similar. Maybe it's coming back south. So if anything, maybe some very hinty possibilities of backflow there, right? Cool. Here is that one line of the station. Maybe we're looking at just half of this graph. We're looking at just that half. We didn't see this coming up portion of it before. That's the previous year, and coming back down. And I'm not sure what this event was, but some adjustment locally in the rift zone. And then here is our most recent, starting to come down possibly a little bit right over here. More visible on this east plot, where you can see that it dropped from accelerating east to back towards the west. And it's a more gentle pattern there, but it is, that certainly has turned around there. Interesting to see that there are some effects occurring on the east rift zone as a result of this recent activity. And similar to Pu'o, slightly further west at Kaumamoa, similar pattern changes right here at the very, very recent time frame there and there, north and east. So all of it showing essentially less pressure in the whole magmatic reservoir all as a whole, right? That upper east rift connector doesn't seem to be really holding the magma or doing its same thing anymore. Further south, Jacuzzi, similar changes recently there, right? So interesting to see what comes of that. And furthest down a rift zone at Jonica, we do not see any of that effect, and that's interesting to see as well, right? The effect that you see further up the rift does not translate past pool, and there's just been a steady, no change, regular drifting thing happening here. The largest adjustment recently was more of this background adjustment. Talking about here, we can go into this again, where we talked about how the rift zone can adjust quite a bit, even without the magma going through there actively, just adjusting locally from magma moving underneath there, way down, and redistributing forces and such. So that's a GPS there. On the south flank, we don't have to look at a whole lot of them, but the one at Ohua is worthwhile because that's the one closest to that intrusion site, and it likewise has stabilized to its previous trend after that intrusionary pulse. Same here, and Ohua, you might say, maybe is still going up, right? But once again, it's been going up for a long time. It's more about the rate. Is it going to come at a rate like this, or is it possibly going to continue rising upwards in that area? And that's interesting because Ohua is that area of that triangle between the southwest rift, the southeast rift, and the Kauai fault zone that is a possible extension of the magma reservoir system that can have that we just don't know that much more about, but that has been proposed to be part of that, an unrecognized, less commonly invoked, we'll say, portion of the magma reservoir. So maybe it's in the game this time. And if that would be something you might imagine if that's were to break all the other patterns everywhere else and be doing its own thing. Too soon to say that. Other south flank stations, Puhimau, slightly down the east rift zone. Previous trends seem to be similar there. Devil's Throat, similar, nothing up on a trail, has stopped moving south as well, indicating lack of push or lack of rift zone swelling. Similar at Makai Makapui, and not a whole lot visible on there. I'm sometimes curious to go down Helena Pali. Helena Pali had a little acceleration, right? So it went south a little bit faster. So perhaps there is some magma that pushed that part of that south flank closer to that southwest rift area a little bit more by Helena Pali. And over here, Mane Station, you can see it seems to be perhaps on a slightly opposite trend there. So maybe that's something slightly more curious there. Very localized as well, that southwest rift area. So maybe there's some changes happening still over there in that southwest rift Kauai area intersection over there. I wanted to look down here at the very furthest points of the island on the south. Apua Point, moving south. You can see it's still moving south. Maybe it slowed a little bit, but really, Kaena Point. Really, everything looks fairly normal there. We had a hint of some possible data coming in here at the G2R station, but not a whole lot we can see over there other than flash it on a screen just one time. So that's a GPS. That's a pattern. We're basically seeing adjustments everywhere, consistent with what we saw before. As far as the trimmer, there's still some interesting things happening occasionally. Some patterns that for multiple stations. Sometimes things more localized to one area than others, but showing up across all of them. And of course, we have that cycle of daytime visitation to the park, nighttime, and all that kind of thing. That's interesting to consider as well there. So that makes this one a little bit more curious. What happened there? If I zoom it in here, what happened there at 10:45 p.m. was probably not a tour bus. So that's interesting to consider, and how localized it actually was. Whereas sometimes you can look on here and say, okay, well, 8:30 a.m., 8 a.m., you start seeing more signals, and I happen to be up at Uekahuna at this time this morning, and I can tell you there's a little bit of traffic started coming in, so you can start to imagine that there could be some effects of visitation to the park coming in during the daytime hours, especially. All in all, just showing it to show that there's still movement indications there. Nothing alarming. There's nothing, totally not black anymore, Robin. Totally blue, showing that everything's wiggling off the charts. So that's really what we are interested in. Sandhill Station. Nothing crazy there either. Still active. It's a volcano. Stuff's always moving around. Essentially, it's such a part of the background. We get to track it a little bit closer now because of all these different signals. So here's our source, USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. That's whose data all of this has been shown to you guys. Most recent update this past week on Tuesday. There's really not a whole lot of significant changes here. Not erupting. No significant changes. 13 small magnitude earthquakes beneath the summit region only in 1 week. SO2 level is low. Tilt meters, no deformation. Supply of magma to intrusion is slowed or stopped. They don't really mention anything about magma signals or anything like that. It's essentially back to the background of what it was doing before, when there was essentially no need to say anything else. So that's it. Not a whole lot of update on this East Rift Zone observation section in a while. It still says no neutral activity. Deformation monitors indicate the Upper East Rift Zone is refilling at rates similar to those measured over the past 2 years and before December 2020. And it says that gas measurements at Pu'o were below detection levels over 9 months ago now. A little updating there. And hazards is typical. That's the Kilauea update. So while we're at it, we'll switch to Mauna Loa, show Mauna Loa update that came out today. 66 earthquakes by the usual record in the same region, summit, upper elevation flanks. No other changes, nothing worth mentioning there at all. So quickly come through here. GPS Mauna Loa has been steady since May. And some small variations, maybe slightly up, slightly down, slightly up, slightly, really it's pretty much the same. And we're getting pretty close to the point where it's about a net equal to a year ago. So from a year ago now, and maybe another month would be more convincing. We're further in this part of the plot, but we're essentially in that same level as we were a year ago. So no net gain or loss from a year ago is where we are right now, despite having actually lost and gained and lost again. We're back to where we started from about a year ago before all that happened. So that's interesting. Looking at long-term trends like that, right? Past 5 years, and that's the section right here we just looked at. So past 5 years, that's really a change. There's been no other year, apart from that segment of 2018 where we had no net change before that. So it's kind of interesting to see what would happen next there in Mauna Loa, especially considering the southwest reflectivity on Kilauea. There's not a whole lot of indication of earthquakes really in Mauna Loa. You can see here's that adjustments that we saw on the summit and southeast flank regions that were much more intense. So adjustments are happening still, but with a lot less earthquakes. And I'll be curious to see some GPS from Mauna Loa at some point as well. Maybe dig into that at some point as well. So that's the last year. Here's the last week on a map. Mauna Loa summit, a little bit of cluster, same regions as usual. Dispersed to the southeast for southwest rift. And last month, same pattern, just a little more populated there. Not a whole lot of change. So we'll just wrap it up here by before we do some discussion and mahalos. With the last couple of volcano watches from the USGS, the one put out last week was this mileage project mapping Kilauea's gas emissions. This is just follow up on a lot of that photography. We showed you guys this photos of the geologists carrying his multi-gas instruments across a down-drop block of the caldera floor, making the first ever comprehensive gas map for that area. Right, so that's interesting that when we actually have that data set out, that'll be fascinating. But it'll probably be a little while. They're compiling it all still and analyzing everything else. So that's the first thing. If you're interested in that, you can find that on HawaiiTracker.com, as well as the second one, which is, if it's not up yet, it will be very shortly, the one that was released today. How does HVO determine which regions are most threatened by lava flows? And you talk about the different approaches here, whether you can look at recurrence intervals. You can look at coverage rates, that kind of thing. They go into the Poisson distribution as far as what percentages you might actually expect for certain numbers. And so without wanting to get into the math of Poisson with all you guys, just read that on your own. And with that, Dane, we can say our thank yous, and starting with hawaiitracker.com, of course, and on from there.
Right. So if you're unfamiliar, we are brought to you by Hawaii Tracker and hawaiitracker.com. That's where we post all of our newest research in written and videos in chronological order. So you guys can go on there and find anything new or anything current that's happening on our volcanoes, and as well as any other natural disasters really taking place on the island. If you want to support this type of this channel and this type of content, make sure to like, subscribe, maybe consider sharing. That really does go a long way to getting this channel promoted, and it helps us out a lot. If you consider making a monetary donation, we take those on hawaiitracker.com/support, as well as super chats here on YouTube. And we appreciate everybody that came today and showed up when there's not a lot happening, right? We know people will come when there's a new eruption or something like that, but it's times like this where the nuance of the volcanoes really gets brought to bear. We do have some sponsors we want to thank. We have some donations on Hawaii Tracker I want to shout out, including Linda H., Mark D., and Nancy D. Appreciate it, everybody. We also are brought to you by Kilauea's Bar and Grill in the heart of Pahoa. It's traditional dishes with a little bit of local twist. They got indoor, outdoor dining options, takeout. If you're visiting or if you're local and thinking about eating out, give Kilauea's a call, make a reservation. Always a good place to stop by. And we appreciate them for their support. Second one is Kalani Tours out of Kona. They have a few different tour packages, including waterfalls, volcanoes, and the Kona Coffee Tour. They do the smaller, more personalized tour experience as opposed to the big box style tours where, big buses and loudspeakers. So you get to get your questions answered, and it's really an educational experience, and we appreciate them as well. We were brought to you also by a grant from the Hawaii Community Foundation and the Puna Strong grant from the County of Hawaii, and we appreciate their support. So with that, let's get into some questions,
Yeah.
So we have only a couple here. First one is from Kenny, who asked, he just said he got here late. Do you think the eruption risk is still there, or do you think it's over now?
Great question. I summarize it, Kenny. I think that we've basically postponed our eruption risk, right? I think that what's interesting is, I didn't bring up a whole historical context, but there are times when you have intrusions down the Southwest Rift where you have a big deflation at the summit, and then that shows you all the magma left the summit and went somewhere else. And there are times where you have eruptions in the Upper East Rift and deflations at the summit. Other times you see giant inflations at the summit, and so it's interesting. We didn't really see a whole lot of either, apart from that one station at Sand Hill. So, and then having that combined with the fact that we see the tilt and the GPS resuming, leads us to believe that the underground faucet, so to speak, is still on. It's still pumping magma up there, and it's just a matter of where does it go, and where is it stored within the volcano, right? And that's where it just needs to find some crack to be in, and once all those cracks are filled, that's when it's going to come to the surface. And before the most recent intrusion, we were looking at our long-term pattern. This is what we do every year: is we look for the earthquakes to build up and spread out and be intense across the region, or usually 2 to 3 months ahead of time, right? So that's kind of what it was, right, Dan? I mean, it's been a few months of the earthquakes are getting more, and they're getting higher and more, and okay, now it's just a matter of time. Like, is it going to be before or after? Like, where's it going to be exactly? We're talking about the over and under for August 23rd, right? So clearly we've extended it by a whole bunch. In the past, it's ranged from, you could have a few weeks before something else changes to having a few months before something else changes, right? So not seeing any earthquakes come up right away now lends me to lean towards a couple months, maybe. We might start seeing the earthquakes building to sufficient levels again, or it might have to break through and pop up. Now, the caveat being that any time between now and then, if it finds that same pathway that it used before and it can push its way out there, it could happen without a whole bunch of earthquakes as well. It's also a possibility, right? And just poke its way back out, at the summit somewhere,
right?
Resume some eruption, as was a possibility before this intrusion still. So that's kind of still on the table. But the fact that we don't see other earthquakes is a big difference from before the intrusion, and why I feel like we're further from an eruption now than we were before the intrusion, because we relieved it a little bit, but it wasn't a big intrusion, and so we didn't relieve it that much, and it's only going to be temporary. And all the signals we see, having deviated a little bit in the last few weeks, I would expect to resume their previous trends. Within a couple months, perhaps, and if not, that'll tell us a lot about what's changed in a pattern of the volcano. So that's kind of where we start from as we iterate. Yeah, that's my long-winded summary there.
Oh, right. GHS, do you think do you know if the magma chemistry changes with each intrusion event or over time?
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's there are lots of batches of magma all the time, right? And so it's not unreasonable to consider that some new batch of magma came from below and pushed things around. When it just intrudes, you don't have a sample of it to take to the lab and analyze. That's really hard to do, right? But if there's an eruption at some point later in the area, you might have magma from this intrusion today mixed with some future eruptions, lava that comes through there and mix with it. So we might get a sample of this intrusion in the future if something erupts through there someday, right? Just like down in 2018 in Puna, we essentially got samples of the 55 lava at the very first couple of days of eruption before we got the 2018 lava after a couple weeks. Similar kind of thing. You have that, you can kind of flush out and get samples of that stuff, right? And that's something that they do. So right now there's no intrusion data point. In 74, they had magma coming in. They had magma that was sitting in the cracks from previous intrusions that was cooling and degassing and getting more sticky and silicic. And then they saw pulses of other magma coming from below that erupted through that, erupted that stuff first, erupted the mixed content second, and then erupted the pure content third across all different periods of time summits. So that's there are definitely different batches, and how they come out and what pattern and how they mix at what point they're released is the whole study of geochemistry of the eruptions, which is fascinating, a whole field of itself. So for sure it's done. The intrusion itself has to be sampled in the future, obviously, through some fortuitous future eruption that mixes with that magma that's underground now. We might know more. Right. What we can know more potentially is it what I'm hoping to hear more from is the INSAR modeling results. For this event this year from the USGS or other researchers, like we've seen for other events in the past. That might be interesting to see if it was a similar area, similar models, if they find similar geometries, or other geometries could be possibilities as well, right? Always get a double, we always present the science, and every publication is a proposition, right? That's not necessarily true or false, but it's just added to the whole grand collective knowledge and process of it, right? So it's good to have someone come and do it again, is what I'm getting to, and do it a slightly different way and all that. So yeah, we'll look forward to that, but no info on that right now. Definitely there are batches, and we can go into batches and actually go into history.
All right. Freeman is asking about tilt meters and kind of the visualization of how those signals that we're looking at, and this goes for kind of the GPS as well in terms of that the axis of them, and how do they preserve them from, say, drift or from just moving with the Earth over time in terms of messing up their calibration.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a tilt meter expert as far as the mechanics of them, but I think the answer is that you probably can have them get decalibrated. through massive events for sure, right? And you want to check on that, but I think they're designed to withstand some of that change. So yeah, I'm not sure what the dimensions are, how much rotation it allows, and all of that. Interesting. We do have some of that. There was a USGS volcano watch that had a tilt meter design in it. Maybe it was the January Volcano Awareness Month earlier this year, to be part of this year. But there was something with tilt meter designs, and they had like essentially the bubble levels, right? And like you have electrodes, and so as a bubble moves, the changes the context of the electrodes. That's kind of what we're. It's a matter of how long is your level, right? How much can you tilt it, kind of thing, right? For it to still work. So I don't know the answer. Yeah,
and also they concrete them into the ground, just to help with that stability usually.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, normally, the ones that I've seen, they make them like a cylinder. It's like a cylindrical metal case that has everything, all the instrumentations within. A lot of times it has like a borehole that's drilled down, so you already have that circular shaft already, and then you just drop this thing into it, and you might cement over top of it. I mean, depending on the installation and all that, I'm not sure exactly, right? But it's supposed to. I think the newer ones are likely self-stabilizing and self-adjusting. You put them in and they basically. Right, so maybe there's a signal they can send to it where it can reset itself. I'm not sure exactly. Good question. Something we could ask a tilt meter expert when we have one on.
Right. We have a $35 super chat from our friend Gary Bryan, who says, "Thanks guys for this update. I appreciate the continued support, Gary."
Hello, Gary.
And I think that does it really for the questions. I don't have any more lined up here. There's the Drones On series is postponed this week. Didn't finish it up, so it'll be out next week. But yeah, that basically does it from my end. And thanks for the update, Phil.
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet. We'll just want to document everything here in case it's. I know there's a lot of people who like to see things as they go, and it's a learning experience to go through this aspect of it as well. And just as much as when it comes up in 2 months, you can say, "Hey, I was there for the build up and the ups and downs." Right? It's like you're riding the entire roller coaster, not just the loop. Right? Like you go through the whole rest of the course as well and see everything else that happens in between. And
I'm still surprised that we're still not lowering the Mauna Loa, or not us, but USGS hasn't lowered the Mauna Loa alert level down to green. That's going to be the one to watch, or at least the little bits. We're trying to find interesting bits in periods without much change. Mauna Loa is really not doing much. So the most interesting thing now is kind of these nuanced arguments.
Yeah, we'll see. We won't be surprised if and when it happens, or if maybe perhaps there's other data, like if they were to release another INSAR that shows there's inflation happening, and that's where we're justifying something. Kind of no movement in the front. Like basically wouldn't be surprised. So we'll be back with you guys next week and see what else happens with our 2 volcanoes. And I won't be surprised if it's quiet for a little while, but we'll see like where it ramps up, and as we see the signs of earthquakes coming up, where they come up will be telling, and if they stay in those areas or shift around over time. And that's the thread that we'll hang on to as we wait and watch as usual, see what Mother Nature does next. So unless something else happens unexpectedly, we'll see you guys in another week, and until then, for HawaiiTracker.com, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.